Lewis Hamilton's Barcelona win gets credited to two things: a revitalised driver and a major aero upgrade. Both true. But there was a third factor sitting in plain sight on all four corners of the car that almost nobody talked about. And it might be the most important development war in Formula One right now that you've never heard of. All season, there's been one gap nobody at Ferrari could close. They could lead a race, but they couldn't keep the tyres alive long enough to stay there. Early in the year, Ferrari would get out front and then simply fade, unable to run as long or as hard as Mercedes once the tyres came on. In Barcelona, in some of the hottest track conditions of the season, that gap disappeared. Ferrari matched Mercedes on tyre degradation almost to the 10th, and it wasn't just the new bodywork doing the work, it was the wheel rims. This isn't a new idea, it's an old battlefield, reopened. Wheel rims used to be a spec part under the previous regulations, identical for every team. Nothing to develop, nothing to hide. Now they're free again. And teams have figured out something important: control the airflow around the wheel, and you control the tyre's temperature, which means you control the single biggest variable in a Formula One race. The target is usually the rear tyres, keeping them as cool as possible without ever falling out of their working window. The fronts are a different problem entirely. At a track like Monaco, teams actually need to warm the fronts up to find grip. McLaren were the first to properly master this with the brake drums and cooling airflow last season, even using the standard rim. Now every team on the grid is running bespoke rims of their own, and Pirelli has noticed the difference. Here's the physics in simple terms. Cold air gets pulled into the brake ducts, cools the brake drums down, and then gets pushed back out. And, on its way out, it passes around the rim itself, through small pockets engineered to maximize surface area and pull heat away from the tyre before it ever builds up. It sounds small. It isn't. And because the FIA doesn't want this turning into a rim for every arms race, there are real limits in place. One homologated design per team, with drawings submitted to Pirelli in advance and the physical rims checked at the factory for fit and for safety. You get one shot at this design, and you have to get it right the first time. This is where it stops being theory. Pirelli's own data shows that with the old standard rims, tyre pressure would typically climb by 2 to 3 psi over the course of a stint, dragging temperatures up with it by 20 to 30 degrees. With this season's bespoke rims, that pressure rise has been pulled down to as little as 1 to 1.5 psi, which works out to roughly 10 to 15 degrees of temperature rise instead. That 15-degree swing is exactly the kind of margin that decides whether a tyre stays inside its operating window or falls off the edge of it. And once a tyre falls outside that window, it starts to slide. Sliding generates more heat. More heat means more sliding. It's a vicious circle that compounds lap after lap. Ferrari's actual gain in Barcelona might only have been 2 or 3 degrees on paper. That was enough to win a Grand Prix. Ferrari got there first. Red Bull could be next, possibly as early as the Austrian Grand Prix, and once the rest of the grid sees what's actually on the table, expect this to spread fast, within whatever limits the FIA allows. Because the FIA is already watching this closely, they're not stepping in yet. But 2027 is when they take a proper look at the rulebook again, and that review could bring fresh restrictions on what teams are allowed to do here. For now, this is the development war hiding in plain sight on every car on the grid, and Ferrari just proved it can be worth an entire Grand Prix win. If you want more breakdowns like this, the stories sitting in plain sight that nobody else is explaining, subscribe and we'll see you in the next one.